Fly home. Don't say anything to your father and sister. The secure message came in at 8:12 a.m., while I sat on a windy terrace in Maui, watching my father laugh for the first time in 22 years at something my sister said. It was from my lead counsel in Seattle, a man who never used encrypted channels unless the house was burning down. 7 words that turned my stomach to ice. 15 hours later, I was standing in the arrivals hall of Denver International Airport. A man in a dark navy suit held a sign with my name. Next to him, 2 federal agents and what they showed me in that briefing room. I don't remember hitting the floor. I just remember waking up to harsh LED lights and a medic asking me to count backward from 20. That was 6 months ago. I still don't sleep through the night, but I need to tell you everything, because what my family did, and what I did about it, changed who I am forever. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and your local time in the comments. My name is Rowan Vance. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my own father and sister tried to destroy me, and how the truth saved my life. The crack in my world didn't start in Maui. It started on a freezing Thursday night, October 19th. I was 13. I shoved the heavy front door open, my boots kicking thick, gray slush onto the hallway rug. My fingers were numb from the walk home, tightly gripping a crumpled permission slip for a museum trip. I just needed a signature and $7. That was it. I didn't even get to take my coat off. My father, Julian, sat at the kitchen table. He didn't look up when the door slammed. He had the phone pressed hard against his ear. His voice was completely flat, empty of any anger or sadness. It sounded like he was reading a grocery list. "It's done," he said into the receiver. "He's leaving tonight." I froze. Even at 13, my mind always looked for patterns, for logic to make sense of things. I thought he was talking about a work trip. I actually smiled, stepping forward to hand him my permission slip. He hung up the phone. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were dead. He looked at me the way you look at a broken glass on the floor, something annoying that just needs to be swept up. "Pack your things," he said. His voice didn't shake. "You're leaving tonight." "Dad? For the field trip?" "Go. Don't come back." I heard a floorboard creak. I looked up. My sister Beatrice stood at the top of the stairs. She was 17. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her face perfectly blank. She didn't gasp. She didn't run down to stop him. She just leaned against the wooden banister, watching me like I was a stranger on a television screen. Julian stood up. He didn't hand me a suitcase. He didn't tell me to grab my winter coat from the closet. He reached under the sink, pulled out a heavy blue plastic recycling bag, the kind meant for broken glass and sharp tin cans, and shoved it against my chest. Before my brain could process the shock, his hand was on my back. He pushed me out the front door and slammed it shut. The deadbolt clicked. A sharp, heavy sound. I stood on the porch, holding a blue plastic bag. The wind howled, biting right through my thin denim jeans. I banged on the wood. "Dad, Beatrice." Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the porch light. I walked, 5 miles in a Colorado blizzard. By the 3rd block, the slush had frozen inside my boots. My feet felt like heavy blocks of wood. The cold chewed through my clothes, making my lungs burn with every breath. My mind raced, trying to compute the error. What did I do? What broke? I dragged my legs, my hands violently shaking. At the corner of Canyon Boulevard, the plastic bag caught on a frozen branch. It ripped open. My notebooks, my math homework, my science project, they spilled out into the freezing gutter water. I dropped to my knees in the snow, watching the blue ink bleed into the ice. And right there, kneeling in the dark, the horrible truth hit me. I wasn't lost. I was thrown away. Nobody was coming to look for me. I forced myself up. I had to survive. I dragged myself to Pine Street. When my grandmother Eleanor opened her heavy oak door, the warm yellow light spilled out onto the snow. She didn't scream. She didn't waste time asking what Julian had done. She dropped to her knees right there on the freezing, snowy porch. She didn't care that the slush was soaking into her wool dress. She pulled my shivering, freezing body tight against her chest, wrapping her arms around me like a shield. "You're home now, little fox," she whispered into my frozen hair. That was the last time anyone in my family held me for 22 years. For 6 years, the small Victorian house on Pine Street was the only place in the world where I actually felt real. My grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, was a retired structural architect. She lived in that creaky, warm house like she hadn't earned a single dollar past her savings account. She wore the same 4 heavy wool sweaters on rotation, always smelling faintly of dried lavender and old paper. She spent her days in the attic studio, her hands stained with ink as she restored antique maps and cracked globes. My grandfather Arthur was the heartbeat of those rooms. He was a quiet man who moved with gentle purpose. He taught me how to chop carrots and sear meat for beef stew on Saturday afternoons. He stood behind me in the bathroom mirror, carefully guiding my hands to tie a half Windsor knot before school. He read to me every night, his voice a steady rumble in the dark. Even when I was 14, technically too old for bedtime stories, I never stopped him. I needed the sound of a father figure who actually wanted to be in the room. But outside those walls, the silence was deafening. Julian never called. Not once. Beatrice never wrote. No birthday cards. No awkward holiday drop-ins. No message passed through a neighbor. Nothing. It was as if a giant eraser had simply wiped me off their map. My analytical mind, the part of me that later built complex software systems, kept trying to find the missing variable. Why did they cut me out? What did I break? But human cruelty doesn't run on logic. My grandmother never forced the subject. She let me heal at my own pace. But one afternoon when I was 15, the dam broke. A baseball coach at school had casually asked why my dad never came to the games. I ran home, climbed up to the attic, and sobbed until my ribs ached. Eleanor didn't offer empty comforts. She slowly set down her silver drafting pen. The old floorboards groaned as she walked over and knelt beside me. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, yet full of a fierce protective heat. "I know it hurts, Rowan," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious whisper. "But you cannot let his emptiness become yours. Someday you'll understand why I have to fight him in the shadows. Why I can't just march over there and scream at him." She gripped my shoulders. "Someday you'll understand why I'm saving the legacy for you. Not now, but someday." I didn't understand. But I noticed things. A woman in a sharp charcoal gray suit started visiting every few months. She and Eleanor would lock themselves in the library. If I walked past the heavy oak door, I'd hear heated, hushed debates. Words like guardianship blocks, irrevocable, and trust parameters leaked through the keyhole. When I asked who she was, Grandma just patted my arm. "A colleague, little Fox, helping with the archives." I didn't push it. I was just grateful to have a roof that didn't suddenly lock me out. Then the safety net tore. Grandpa Arthur died when I was 18. A massive heart attack in the kitchen, quick, merciless, and suddenly the house on Pine Street felt too big, too cold. The smell of beef stew vanished. But Eleanor kept going. She drove me to university tours, her jaw set with determination. She ruthlessly red-penned my entrance essays until they were perfect. She also kept a heavy iron chest locked on the highest shelf of her wardrobe. She never opened it when I was in the room. I asked her about it once, watching her trace the dark metal lock with her thumb. "Your foundation," she said softly, "safe from the rot." 4 weeks before I moved into my college dorm, I found Eleanor. It was a Sunday morning. She was still in her favorite gray wool sweater, sitting in her reading chair. One hand rested gently on an open book about cathedral spires. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful. She looked completely done fighting. The funeral was tiny. 8 quiet neighbors, the local priest, and the man who ran the corner bookstore. And then, the heavy church doors swung open, and Julian walked in. I hadn't seen my father in 6 years. He wore a crisp navy suit, a heavy gold watch flashing under the stained glass light. He moved down the aisle like an actor playing a grieving widower in a movie. He dabbed his dry eyes with a white handkerchief. He whispered thank you to strangers he had never met. He never looked at me, not even a glance. But Beatrice did. She was 23 now, dressed in sharp black. She walked directly up to the front row where I sat alone. She leaned down, the scent of expensive perfume washing over me. Her face was perfectly smooth, her lips hovering just inches from my ear. "Grandma left everything to Dad," she whispered, her voice a terrifying, cheerful hiss. "The house, the accounts. There's nothing for you, Rowan." She pulled back, and for a fraction of a second she smiled, a quick razor-sharp smirk that vanished before anyone else could see it. Then she walked back to Julian. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I was 19, completely alone in the world again. After the service, I stood in the freezing parking lot, zipping up my thin jacket. A woman stepped out from behind a black town car, charcoal suit, direct, unblinking eyes. I recognized her immediately from the library. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice strictly professional but laced with something urgent. "My name is Elena Thorne. I was your grandmother's solicitor for 25 years. She reached into her leather briefcase and held out a thick, heavy-duty blue envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp. Deliberate. Secret. Your grandmother asked me to give you this when the time is right, Elena said, her eyes scanning the parking lot as if making sure Julian wasn't watching. She handed me the envelope, followed by a crisp white business card. The time isn't now, but keep my card. Do not lose it. I took the envelope. It felt like holding a live wire. I nodded, too terrified to speak. I put both the envelope and the card deep inside my wallet. I rode the loud rattling train back to my empty room that night, my stomach tied in knots. 19 years old, no family, no safety net, carrying a sealed letter I was too afraid to open. I didn't know those 2 pieces of paper would save my life 16 years later. I paid for university the way ghosts do, unseen, working in the dark, grants, midnight security shifts, and cheap canned soup 4 nights a week. I studied software engineering and finance at Georgia Tech. I loved code. Code made sense. If you put the right variables in, you got the right output. Code was logical. It didn't change the rules without warning. It never packed your bags and pushed you into the snow. I graduated with honors and took a bus to Seattle with $900 in a battered canvas duffel bag. I didn't call it ambition back then. I called it survival. By 26, I was writing software for a massive tech firm in South Lake Union. I worked 75-hour weeks. My apartment was a basement box that smelled like damp concrete and old dust. I ate takeout noodles over my glowing keyboard at 2 a.m. Nobody in my family knew what city I lived in. If my heart had stopped in that basement, it would have been weeks before anyone noticed. But in that silence, something else was growing. Not anger. Anger burns out. This was cold, hard focus. I learned how money actually worked. I studied term sheets, equity, and corporate structuring. And late at night I couldn't stop thinking about the kids I'd met in college who had aged out of the foster system. Kids pushed out the door at 18 with nothing but a trash bag. I knew the exact weight of that bag. I knew the crushing, heavy panic of realizing you have no one to call when your car engine dies, or when a hospital asks for an emergency contact. At 29, I built Anchor Point. It was a simple platform, an algorithm to match kids leaving the system with professional coaches. It wasn't about giving them a handout. It was about consistency, giving them a human being who would simply pick up the phone when it rang. By 33, a private equity group bought into the vision. Anchor Point hit a $62 million valuation. I was the CEO. I wore custom suits and sat in glass boardrooms overlooking the Seattle skyline. On paper, I was bulletproof. But inside my bedroom closet, hidden behind expensive leather shoes, I kept a folded blue recycling bag. Just in case. You never unlearn the drop. My only real friend was Simon Reed. He was a trauma therapist I'd met in the university library years ago. Simon was a big guy from Portland with a thick beard and a blunt, unpolished way of speaking. He was the only person who saw right through my CEO mask. He knew every dark corner of my past. One rainy Tuesday, sitting in a dim coffee shop in Belltown, I was staring blankly at my phone screen. Simon set his heavy mug down on the wooden table. "You still check for their names, don't you?" Simon asked, his voice low over the sound of the espresso machine. "I'm checking my emails for work," I lied, not looking up. Simon leaned forward, blocking the dim light. "Rowan, listen to me. I've seen 100 cases exactly like yours." His eyes were completely serious. "If your father or your sister ever reach out, do not mistake it for love. It is never because they miss you. If they come back, it means they have run out of options. They are looking for a lifeline, not a brother." I nodded slowly, telling myself I believed him. But trauma leaves a crack in your logic, a tiny desperate part of your brain that still wants to be wanted. Then, a crack appeared in the silence. I was auditing my old college loan files late one night when I found a buried line of code in the ledger. My university scholarship hadn't come from the school at all. It had been quietly funded by an anonymous legacy trust. Every semester, a silent transfer. No name. No address. Just a ghost making sure I didn't fall. I felt a hard lump in my throat. Eleanor. She had fought for me from the shadows, just like she promised. I was thinking about my grandmother on a quiet Tuesday night. 10:22 p.m. Seattle was wrapped in a thick, cold fog. I was sitting on my dark balcony, the glow of the city reflecting off the wet glass. I was half watching a documentary about suspension bridges on my laptop, a habit I'd inherited from Eleanor. I was fascinated by how structures bear heavy weight without snapping. Then the cell phone vibrated against the metal table. It was a harsh, loud buzz that made my chest physically jump. I stared at the glowing screen cutting through the darkness. A Colorado area code. My lungs seized. The air turned to ice. My mind raced through 1,000 logical reasons to ignore it, but my hand was already reaching out. I pressed the phone to my ear. I shouldn't have answered. I really wish I hadn't. Rowan. The voice was deeper now, thickened by age, but the cold rhythm was identical. It slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. It's your father. Silence stretched over the line. Mine, not his. I gripped the cold metal of the balcony railing. My knuckles turned stark white. I felt 13 again, staring at the kitchen table. I know I don't deserve this call, Julian said. His tone was perfectly measured. Soft, practiced, like a man reading an apology from a teleprompter. I've been diagnosed with early-stage pulmonary disease. He paused, letting the word disease hang in the air, waiting for me to gasp. When I didn't, he kept going. He told me he'd been volunteering at a local shelter. He claimed he'd been in therapy. He said the word sorry 6 times in 3 minutes. Each apology sounded smoother than the last. He didn't sound broken. He sounded rehearsed. Then he dropped the hook. I want us to be together. All of us. Before it's too late. A holiday. Maui. As a family. His breath hitched. A theatrical crack in his voice. Beatrice wants to apologize too. I closed my eyes. No. He immediately pivoted from sorrow to panic. Please, Rowan. I'm dying. I need my son. I hung up the phone. I stood there shivering in the Seattle fog, my chest tight. I immediately called Simon. Illness card, Simon said the second I repeated the conversation. His voice was sharp, cutting through the static. Textbook leverage. He's weaponizing mortality to bypass your boundaries. Do not go, Rowan. It's been 22 years, Simon. I whispered, the logic slipping away. It's been 22 years of silence, Simon fired back. And now he wants Maui? Think like a CEO, not a wounded kid. What does he want from you? I didn't sleep for 4 nights. I paced my dark apartment, arguing with the ghost of a boy who just wanted his dad. On the 4th night, I picked up the small silver-framed photo on my desk. It was me and Eleanor sitting on her creaky porch the autumn I was 16. She was smiling, holding a secret. Someday you'll understand why I have to fight him in the shadows. I made a decision that defied every logical rule I knew. I wanted to see the truth for myself. I called Julian back. I'll come, I said, my voice empty of emotion. 4 days, not 6. I'm booking my own flights, and my own villa. I'm not staying in your room, he agreed instantly. No pushback, no negotiation. That was my first warning. He was too eager to close the deal. The next morning, at 8:15 a.m., my corporate attorney, David Lynn, called me. David was sharp, cautious, and never called unless a contract was bleeding. Rowan, David said, his voice tight. Someone just ran a soft credit check and a property sweep on your name out of Colorado. I rubbed my tired eyes, staring at my computer screen. I'm the CEO of a $60 million tech firm, David. Public records checks happen every week. It pinged your personal LLCs, not Anchor Point, David pressed. Probably nothing, but I wanted to flag it. I brushed it off. I was so focused on bracing myself for the emotional impact of seeing them that I missed the second warning completely. Maui in late August is devastatingly beautiful. It feels artificial. The air smells like plumeria and salt, and the golden light makes everything look like a movie set you aren't allowed to touch. I drove the rental car an hour from Kahului Airport to the private resort Beatrice had booked. It was a massive, sprawling estate. The kind of place where a cold towel cost $50. I didn't ask how they could afford it. Julian was waiting on the sun-drenched terrace. He looked older, frail, dressed in a loose white linen shirt. His hair was completely gray. The moment he saw me walking up the stone path, his face crumbled. He opened his arms and started violently sobbing before I was even within 10 feet of him. He threw his arms around my stiff shoulders. You're so strong. He wept loudly, making sure the nearby guests heard. You look just like your grandmother. I stood frozen. I didn't hug him back. Beatrice stood a few feet behind him. She was taller now, sharper. She wore a sleek silk dress and expensive designer sunglasses. Her smile was curated, perfectly balanced between welcoming and analytical. She stepped forward and extended her hand like we were finalizing a corporate merger. Hey brother, long time, she said smoothly. She introduced her boyfriend, Mark Hayden. He was 31, with dark slicked back hair, and a smile that looked like a permanent fixture. He grabbed my hand with both of his, shaking it vigorously. I've heard so much about you, Mark boomed. his voice sounding exactly like a timeshare salesman closing a pitch. Dinner that first night was agonizingly normal. We sat on a balcony overlooking the crashing black ocean. Julian talked softly about his charity work, occasionally coughing softly into a napkin. Beatrice talked about her marketing firm, laughing a little too loudly. Mark aggressively kept my wine glass full, constantly reaching across the table to pour more. Nobody mentioned the 22 years of silence. Nobody mentioned the blue recycling bag. But I watched them. My brain, trained to spot anomalies in code, started picking up the errors in their performance. Beatrice casually asked twice how the valuation of my tech company was holding up. Then over dessert, she leaned in, dropping her voice. "Have you diversified your personal assets, Rowan? I mean, are you highly liquid right now? Family should protect each other's wealth, especially with these volatile markets." I slowly set my fork down. I gave a vague, non-committal answer about tech stocks. I smiled, but my blood ran cold. They weren't trying to heal a family. They were measuring the vault. The next morning, Julian clapped his hands together on the bright, sunny terrace. "Family portraits," he announced. "Something to hold on to. We need memories." I stood on the grass, feeling completely disconnected from my own body. What harm could photos do? Plenty, when the photographer is a prop. Julian flagged down a resort photographer. While the man adjusted his long lens, Julian casually draped his arm around my shoulder. But as he leaned in, his voice suddenly rose in volume, perfectly timed so the affluent couple reading on the nearby loungers could hear every single word. "My son returned to us after years of being lost," Julian said, his voice quivering with theatrical emotion. "He was always the wanderer. Being lost. As if I'd just wandered away from a campfire. As if my 13-year-old self hadn't been shoved out a locked door with a recycling bag full of wet homework in a blizzard." My jaw clamped shut. I didn't correct him. I forced my face into a tight, professional smile for the flashing camera. I was standing with a man who was actively rewriting my trauma for an audience of strangers. Later that afternoon, the trap started to close. I was sitting by the infinity pool, reading a tech journal, the blazing sun beating down on the concrete. The pool deck was quiet except for the hum of the filters. Beatrice slid into the lounger next to me. She didn't look at the water. She looked directly at me. Her voice dropped half an octave, shifting from cheerful sister to aggressive negotiator. "Look, Rowan, I'll be honest with you," she started, pulling off her designer sunglasses. "I've had some setbacks, a few bad calls, nothing major." She waved her hand dismissively, minimizing the problem. "But, have you ever thought about a joint family office? An LLC structure? It protects individual assets under a collective tax umbrella." My eyes stayed locked on my journal. "I'm not in a position to merge my assets, Beatrice." She didn't miss a beat. She pivoted immediately. "You know Grandma left everything to Dad, right?" she said. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, testing my reaction. "The Pine Street house, the bonds. Not much, really. But Dad's getting older. The disease is progressing. We need to simplify things before he passes." She was probing the perimeter of my knowledge. She was watching my face for a flicker of recognition. "I don't know the specifics of her estate," I answered evenly. It was the truth. She relaxed slightly, a micro-expression of relief flashing across her features before she hid it behind another tight smile. "Well, it's just a lot of paperwork. Dad's exhausted by it." That night the mask fully slipped. I was standing in the dark bathroom of my private villa, running cold water over my face. The sheer mental exhaustion of pretending was crushing me. As I reached for a towel, I heard a sound outside my open window, voices on the balcony below mine. I froze, the towel halfway to my face. The water continued to run into the sink, masking my presence. I leaned my ear against the cool tiles. It was Julian and Beatrice. Their voices weren't soft and emotional anymore. They were sharp, tight, and furious. "He doesn't suspect a thing," Julian hissed, the frailty completely gone from his tone. "Keep pushing him, Dad," Beatrice snapped back. "His birthday is in exactly 3 weeks. If he doesn't sign before he turns 35, the executor unlocks the sealed trust." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Sealed trust? Unlocks at 35? He's alert," Beatrice continued, her voice dripping with frustration. "I tried the LLC angle by the pool today. He deflected instantly. He's too corporate." "Then be more convincing, Beatrice," Julian ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Or we lose the entire estate. All of it." The silence that followed was heavier than the crashing waves. I pressed my back hard against the bathroom wall, my breath caught in my throat. I waited 5 agonizing minutes until I heard the sliding glass door below slam shut. My hands were shaking violently. I snatched my phone off the counter and opened an encrypted messaging app. I typed frantically to my corporate lawyer in Seattle. David, dig into Eleanor Sterling's estate immediately. Find the executor. Find out what unlocks when I turn 30. Morning, day 4. The last day I had agreed to stay. The Maui sun was blindingly bright, pouring over the terrace where a table was set with fresh fruit and Kona coffee. But the air felt incredibly heavy to me. I sat down, keeping my face perfectly neutral. I was a CEO. I knew how to sit in a hostile boardroom and pretend I was relaxed. Beatrice walked out, carrying a thick black leather binder. She set it casually on the glass table, right between the coffee pot and my plate. She acted like it was just a menu. So I've been doing some organizing for the Sterling estate, she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her hand didn't shake. Turns out Grandma had some land and holdings that were never correctly filed. Dad and I think it's better if we all sign this today, just to consolidate everything under a single family board before the new tax year. She flipped the binder open and slid a crisp printed document toward me. A heavy black pen rested on top. The header read, Sterling Vance Family LLC, Master Operating Agreement. I am not a lawyer, but I have spent 7 years staring at term sheets, cap tables, and founder agreements. I know how to spot a trap hidden under thick, boring legal words. I kept my face blank and started to read. I skimmed past the standard tax clauses. My eyes scanned the pages rapidly until I found it. Buried deep on page 14. Section 4.1. Irrevocable proxy and power of attorney. My blood ran ice cold. It clearly stated that by joining this LLC, any unvested inherited assets or sealed trusts belonging to the signers would automatically fall under the complete voting control of the managing member. The managing member was listed as Beatrice Vance. This wasn't a family office. It was a financial guillotine. If I signed this paper the exact second my grandmother's trust unlocked on my 35th birthday, Beatrice would have the absolute legal power to drain it, sell it, or borrow against it. I would be signing my own throat away. I slowly slid the heavy binder back across the glass table. I need time to analyze this properly, I said, my voice dangerously calm. It's just a formality, Rowan. Beatrice leaned forward, her casual act instantly cracking. A sharp, desperate edge crept into her voice. Dad already signed it. Julian reached across the table, his hand trembling as he tried to push the document back toward me. Rowan, please. My health. We just need peace. I said I need time. I repeated, staring dead into Julian's eyes. I will send it to my legal counsel in Seattle. Beatrice's eyes narrowed into dark, furious slits. The friendly sister mask completely fell off, revealing something cold and panicked underneath. Mark, her boyfriend, swallowed hard. He nervously pulled back his sleeve and checked his heavy watch. He looked terrified. I stood up, left my coffee untouched, and walked back to my villa. The second I locked my door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was David Lynn, my lawyer. But the caller ID screen flashed red, showing a highly encrypted proxy line. Rowan, listen to me very carefully, David said. His voice wasn't just serious, it was breathless. I got a call an hour ago from a woman named Elena Thorne. She's a solicitor in Boulder. She has been secretly executing your grandmother's estate. I stopped breathing. The woman in the charcoal suit, the blue envelope. I need you to pack your bag right now, David commanded, his words clipping at a fast military pace. Walk out the front door and get to the airport. Do not wait. David, what is going on? My voice shook. Elena hired a private investigator 8 weeks ago, the exact day your father called you. They have been monitoring Beatrice's digital footprint. Rowan, they intercepted encrypted messages. David paused, and I could hear him swallow. If you do not sign that document today, they are not going to let you leave the island. The silence in my room was suddenly deafening. Fly home, David ordered. Do not say a single word to your father or sister. There is a flight at 9 p.m. out of Kahului. Be on it. A driver will be waiting at the Denver airport. Do not go back out to the terrace. If they are in the hallway, turn around. I sat on the edge of the mattress. My hands were freezing. For exactly 2 minutes, I stared at the blank wall. My brain tried to fight the truth. What if David is wrong? What if I'm overreacting? But then the pieces snapped together. The irrevocable proxy. The whispers on the balcony. The family that threw me into the snow at 13 had just slid a trap across a brunch table. And when I didn't step into it, they readied the trapdoor. I set a silent alarm for 6:30 p.m. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat in the dim room, listening to every single footstep in the hallway. At 6:30 p.m., the sun began to set, casting long dark shadows across the floor. The hallway smelled sickeningly sweet, like hibiscus flowers and wet sand. I grabbed my canvas duffel bag. I opened the side door of the villa, slipped out into the humid evening air, and walked quickly down the service path to the main driveway. I didn't check out. I didn't leave a note. I got into my rental car and watched the massive resort fade away in my rearview mirror. I sat at the Kahului airport gate for 2 hours. I felt like a ghost. Families laughed around me. A tourist bumped my knee with a surfboard. I just stared straight ahead, gripping a paper cup of water I couldn't drink. I texted Simon from the jet bridge. Something is very wrong. I'm coming back. I'll call when I land. The plane took off at 9:10 p.m. I pressed my head against the cold plastic window, watching the tiny lights of the island tilt and disappear into the black ocean. The resort. The family I had let myself hope for during 96 stupid fragile hours. Gone. At 10:45 p.m. High above the Pacific Ocean, my phone buzzed on the plane's Wi-Fi. A barrage of texts lit up the screen in the dark cabin. Beatrice, 10:45. Where are you? Dad is terrified. We've been looking everywhere. Julian, 10:47. Kunwei again. I'm so sick. Come back to the room. Beatrice, 10:57. We need to finalize the LLC. It's urgent. Don't be selfish, Rowan. Answer me. 3 messages. 12 minutes. Panic, then guilt, then demands. The exact cycle of abuse I had watched Julian use my entire life. The soft start, the bleeding middle, the hard aggressive finish. Beatrice had mastered his art. I turned my phone completely off. I slid my hand into the inner pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against a small, stiff piece of paper. I pulled it out. A business card. Softened by years of being carried, its sharp corners rounded and worn down. Elena Thorne, solicitor. I had carried it in my wallet for 16 years. I had transferred it from bag to bag, wallet to wallet, never truly knowing why I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Now staring at it under the dim reading light of the airplane, I finally knew. Denver International Airport, Gate A22. The air in the terminal was dry and freezing, a sharp slap after the heavy, sweet heat of Maui. I walked down the long, polished corridor gripping my canvas bag. My chest felt tight. Every step felt like I was walking closer to the edge of a cliff in the dark. I was right. I reached the bottom of the escalators near baggage claim. The crowd was thin, mostly exhausted red-eye travelers. But standing near Carousel 4 was a woman holding a small white cardboard sign, R. Vance. She wore a sharp charcoal gray suit. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight professional knot. Beside her stood 2 large men in dark windbreakers. They weren't local police. Their posture was too rigid. They were federal agents, their eyes scanning the moving crowd with cold military precision. The woman lowered the sign the second she locked eyes with me. Mr. Vance, she said. Her voice was steady, cutting right through the airport noise. My name is Elena Thorne. I was your grandmother Eleanor Sterling's solicitor for 25 years. She stepped forward and offered her hand. Her grip was iron firm, her eyes direct and entirely without pity. We need to speak in private, right now. The agents flanked us. They didn't speak. They led me down a restricted staff hallway to a secure briefing room near the airport police substation. It was a sterile, windowless box. Concrete walls painted flat gray, a heavy metal table bolted to the floor, and harsh LED lights that hummed like a warning siren. Elena sat in the metal chair across from me. She unlatched her leather briefcase and placed 3 items on the cold table, arranging them deliberately, like she was setting a trap for a dangerous animal. A thick bound ledger, a heavy file full of color-coded tabs, and a sealed blue envelope with my grandmother's unmistakable sharp handwriting. Your grandmother drafted a sealed testament in 2010, Elena began, her voice echoing slightly in the bare room. It names you, Rowan Vance, as the sole heir of her entire legacy. It is locked in a generation-skipping trust. That includes the house on Pine Street, a portfolio of municipal bonds, and commercial land parcels she held secretly for 30 years. Elena looked at me, making sure I understood the gravity. The estimated value is $3.2 million. The room tilted. I grabbed the cold edge of the metal table to steady myself. She instructed me to activate and unlock the trust on your 35th birthday, Elena continued, her tone relentless. But Beatrice found out. 7 months ago, Your sister broke a back window at the empty Pine Street house. She pried open a floor safe and found a discarded, early draft of the estate planning. She saw the 35th birthday clause. She told your father. My analytical brain, the part of me that built software systems, suddenly saw the entire architecture of their lie. They realized that once you turned 35, the money was legally yours. Untouchable, Elena said. Their only window was to get you to sign away your proxy rights before the trust unlocked. Together they built the Maui trip. A stage to trap you. Elena opened the thick, tabbed file. But estate fraud is not why the FBI is standing outside that door. She gestured to a man sitting quietly in the shadows at the end of the table. I hadn't even noticed him. He was thin, in his 50s, with closely cropped hair, and a face that revealed absolutely nothing. This is David Vance, Elena said. No relation to you. He is private intelligence. I hired him 8 weeks ago, the exact day your father suddenly called you. I knew they were making a play for the trust. David slid his chair forward. He opened a heavy black laptop and turned the glowing screen toward me. Your sister owes $410,000, David said. His voice was completely flat, like he was reading weather data. Offshore gambling syndicates. Her lenders are not patient people. Her marketing firm is bankrupt. She is desperate. He clicked a button, bringing up a digital timeline on the screen. Step 1, David pointed to a date. Julian reconnects with the estranged son using a fake illness. Step 2, get you to sign the LLC operating agreement in Maui, giving Beatrice immediate power of attorney to drain your trust. David locked eyes with me. Step 3, he pulled up a digital chat log. The text bubbles were green and gray. We mirrored Beatrice's encrypted messaging app, David explained. These are direct conversations between your sister and a man named Miller. Miller is a local heavy in Maui. He has a long history of insurance fraud and violent intimidation. I stared at the glowing screen. My eyes traced the letters, but my brain violently rejected the words. Beatrice, he's here. Villa 22, he's alert. I tried the LLC angle by the pool. He deflected. He's too corporate. Miller, if he doesn't sign by Friday, we go to the alternative. The alternative costs triple. I need half up front. Beatrice, secure it. I'll pay from the estate once probate clears. Make it clean. The air in the room vanished. My lungs stopped working. What is the alternative? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like me. It was a hollow, scraping whisper. Make it look like a fall, David said without blinking. Julian casually suggested a family hiking trip for tomorrow morning. Cliffside trails. Loose rocks. If you die intestate without a wife or children, your next of kin inherits everything by default. David closed the laptop softly. That next of kin is Julian. Julian would inherit the $3.2 million, and Julian would pay Beatrice's debts to the syndicate. I read the screen 4 times. The words didn't change. Your sister, David said quietly, letting the brutal reality settle over the table, was actively planning your death. I thought I had hit the absolute bottom. I thought the betrayal could not cut any deeper. But Elena reached into the file and pulled out one final printed paper. This is a text exchange between Beatrice and your father, Elena said gently, sliding the paper across the metal table. Timestamped yesterday morning, exactly 10 minutes after you refused to sign the black binder at brunch. I looked down at the paper. My hands started to shake. Beatrice, he's resisting the proxy. He wants his lawyers to look at it. We need to go with Miller's plan. I have no other way to clear the debt. There was a 3-minute gap. Then, Julian's reply. Julian, do what you must. Just keep me in the dark. 8 words. No hesitation. No argument to save his son's life. He didn't say no. He just wanted plausible deniability. He was willing to let me be thrown off a cliff for money, as long as he didn't have to watch. My own father. I stared at the 8 words on the printed page. Do what you must. Just keep me in the dark. I stood up. The metal legs of my chair scraped harshly against the concrete floor. 1 second, I said. My voice sounded like dry leaves. I didn't wait for permission. I walked out of the briefing room and down the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor to the restroom. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and locked the deadbolt behind me. The silence of the tiled room hit me, and then, I broke. I didn't just cry. I shattered in a way I hadn't since I was a 13-year-old boy standing in the freezing slush with a torn recycling bag. Violent, uncontrollable shivers wrecked my frame. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink so hard my knuckles turned stark white. My stomach violently revolted, purging out of pure adrenaline, terror, and the absolute crushing weight of betrayal. I looked up at the mirror. The harsh LED light buzzed above me like a warning siren. I expected to see a 35-year-old tech CEO. Instead, I saw the ghost of a discarded child. My father hadn't just thrown me away. He had actively signed off on my murder to clear a debt. I turned on the cold water. I splashed it over my face, letting the freezing shock ground me. In my profession, when a system suffers a catastrophic failure, you don't panic. You isolate the corrupted code. You sever the connection. I dried my face with a rough paper towel. I locked the broken boy away and put the armor back on. When I walked back into the briefing room, my eyes were red and my throat felt like sandpaper. But the shaking had stopped. What happens now? I asked, my voice flat and dead. Elena leaned forward, her hands folded over the ledger. She began explaining the legal machinery. Federal injunctions, coordination with the Hawaii Police Department, wire fraud charges across state lines. She was halfway through a sentence about securing a federal protection order when the sound in the room suddenly dialed down to a low underwater hum. The gray walls rushed toward me. The floor hit my chest. I woke up staring at a ceiling grid. A medic was kneeling beside me, pressing 2 fingers hard against my neck to check my pulse. "Don't move," the medic said calmly. "You had a severe stress spike. BP bottomed out. Can you count backward from 20 for me?" I counted. 20, 19, 18, 18. I stared at the harsh lights, realizing how close I had come to the edge. Grandma Eleanor knew this would happen. Maybe she didn't know the exact details. Not Miller, not the cliffside, but she knew the terrifying depth of Julian's greed. She spent the last years of her life building a legal vault of iron to protect me from her own son. Elena sat in the metal chair beside me, quiet as a shadow. She handed me a small plastic cup of water. "Take your time, Rowan," she said gently, "but be ready. The Maui PD is moving on Miller right now." I sat up slowly. I drank the water, forcing my breathing to steady. "I don't want a quiet family feud," I said, the cold focus returning. "I want the truth dragged into the light. All of it. I want them stripped of the fake narrative they've sold to the world for 22 years. Elena nodded. A small proud smile touched the corners of her mouth. She reached into her leather bag and set the sealed blue envelope on my lap. Heavy-duty paper. My grandmother's sharp handwriting. "You never opened it," Elena said. I shook my head. "Open it when you are in a safe place," she said softly. She wrote it the month before she passed. Elena arranged a secure room at a high-rise hotel in downtown Denver. It was quiet, anonymous, and locked down. Simon, my therapist and best friend, dropped everything. He flew in from Seattle on a midnight flight. When he walked through the hotel door, he dropped his heavy coat on the floor and pulled me into a massive, crushing hug. He didn't say a word for a long time. It was the exact opposite of Julian's theatrical, sobbing embrace in Maui. Simon's hug was real. Finally he stepped back. "I told you," he said softly. "I told you not to go." "I know," I whispered, collapsing onto the edge of the sofa. "But if I didn't go, they would have kept hunting the trust in the dark. Now they've stepped into the light. They exposed themselves." At 2 a.m. the city outside the glass was completely silent. Simon was asleep in the adjoining room. I sat on the floor leaning against the cold glass window and pulled the blue envelope from my bag. The wax seal cracked loudly in the quiet room. Inside was a single sheet of pale gray vellum and a faded photograph. Eleanor's handwriting was sharp, architectural, and deliberate. "My dearest Rowan, if you are reading this, it means Arthur is gone and I am gone, and someone is trying to break into the foundation I laid for you. I am so sorry I couldn't shield you in the light while I was here. But I want you to know something, and I need you to believe it. You were never the broken one. Your father was hollow long before you were born. He drained you instead of filling himself. You deserve the horizon, little fox. Build your own fortress. Do not let them in." "Grandma E." I turned over the photograph. It was me at 6 years old, sitting on Eleanor's wooden drafting table in the attic. Both of us were laughing at something off camera. On the back, written in soft pencil, "You are always enough." Simon woke up an hour later to find me still sitting on the floor, gripping the photo against my chest, tears running hot and silent down my face. He didn't ask questions. He just brought a blanket, sat on the floor beside me, and stayed there until the sun came up. At 4:12 a.m., my phone lit up on the nightstand. "Elena, Miller has been apprehended by federal agents at a motel. He is cooperating. Your sister will be taken into custody at 8 a.m. Hawaii time." 8 a.m. sharp. The Maui sun was probably just starting to warm the stone terraces. According to the brief, factual log David Vance sent me later, 2 marked police units and an unmarked FBI SUV pulled silently up to the resort's front entrance. Beatrice was sitting at the poolside buffet, wearing a yellow sundress, eating fresh fruit. They walked right past the tourists. They took her in front of everyone. The officers loudly read her Miranda rights while Julian stood frozen by the table, clutching a glass of orange juice like the ground was actively swallowing him. Julian's phone call came exactly 50 minutes after the arrest. I answered on the first ring. I hit record. "What have you done?" Julian was gasping, his voice completely unhinged. The polite, fragile old man routine was gone. "They took your sister. She's innocent. You called the police on your own family. She hired a man to throw me off a cliff, Dad," I said. My voice was absolute ice. Silence. A long, terrifying gap of dead air. I could hear the wind rustling the palm trees through his phone. The FBI intercepted her encrypted app logs, Julian," I said, stripping him of the title Dad forever. All of them. Her conversations with Miller, her negotiations for the hit. I let that sink in like a blade. "Including your logs." "What logs?" His voice shrank to a terrified squeak. I read it directly from the screenshot, enunciating every single syllable. "Do what you must. Just keep me in the dark." "That was you, Julian. Yesterday morning." 15 seconds of absolute suffocating silence. I could hear his rapid, panicked breathing. He was trapped. The system had locked him out. That was about the LLC signatures," he whispered desperately. "A pathetic final lie. Not about hurting you. Rowan, please. That's for a federal jury to decide," I said. I hung up the phone. I blocked his number. The connection was permanently severed. Over the next few days, the adrenaline crashed, leaving a heavy, exhausting silence in its place. The reality of the fallout settled over my Denver hotel room like thick dust. Beatrice was denied bail. Wire fraud and conspiracy to commit murder are not charges you can just smile your way out of. She was sitting in a federal holding cell in Hawaii. Mark Hayden, the boyfriend with the salesman's smile, vanished. He checked out of the Maui resort less than an hour after Beatrice was handcuffed. He was a phantom, a rat fleeing a sinking ship. But Julian did not run. He dug in. My father was a master at rewriting history, and within 72 hours he launched a massive counterattack. He hired an expensive legal team. They filed an emergency motion to freeze and contest Eleanor's sealed trust. Their argument was predictable. A standard legal maneuver. They claimed my grandmother had lacked the mental capacity to sign the documents in 2010. They painted her as an old, confused woman, manipulated by a bitter, estranged grandson. Julian transformed himself instantly from a silent accomplice in a murder plot into a tragic elderly victim. He posted on his private country club's online forum, "My estranged son is trying to seize his grandmother's estate and frame my daughter to steal her business. Please keep my family in your thoughts during this nightmare." It worked. People love a simple story. My cell phone started ringing. A woman from Julian's tennis group left a screeching voicemail calling me a monster. A man whose name I didn't even know left a message telling me I should be absolutely disgusted with what I was doing to my dying father. Sitting in the dim hotel room, listening to those messages, the old dark isolation crept back in. The 13-year-old boy in me wondered, am I the bad guy? Am I breaking my own family? Then the phone rang again. An unknown Colorado number. I almost didn't answer. But my finger hit the green button. I didn't say hello. I just waited. "Rowan?" The voice was old, slightly shaky but kind. "This is Martha Hayes. I lived 4 houses down from your father on Cedar Drive. The house with the large oak tree." I closed my eyes. I remembered her. She used to give out full-sized candy bars on Halloween. "Yes, I remember you, Mrs. Hayes. Rowan, I'm calling because I owe you the truth," she said. She took a deep, trembling breath. "Your father told everyone in the neighborhood that you left at 13 because you were a violent, troubled kid. He told us you were sent away to a strict disciplinary school in another state. We all believed him. He was so convincing." My chest tightened. The lie he had built was so complete. "But yesterday," Martha continued, her voice breaking, "I saw a local news blotter online about Beatrice's federal arrest in Hawaii, and it made me remember the night you left. October. The blizzard. Rowan, I called the sheriff that night. I stopped breathing. You called the police." "I was looking out my kitchen window," she whispered, crying softly now. I saw a child walking alone in the freezing slush. You were carrying a torn blue trash bag. The snow was blowing so hard you could barely walk. I called 911. The deputy went to your father's house an hour later. Julian told the officer that you had thrown a tantrum and run down the block, but that a relative had already safely picked you up. A hot tear spilled over my eyelid. For 22 years I thought my suffering was entirely invisible. I thought I was a ghost. But someone had seen me. I should have asked more questions, Martha sobbed into the phone. I shouldn't have believed him. I am so sorry, Rowan. Don't be sorry, I said, my voice cracking completely. You just gave me my sanity back. Thank you. When Elena arrived at the hotel later that afternoon, she confirmed it. She pulled a dusty piece of paper from her thick file. It was a copy of that exact 911 dispatch report from 22 years ago. Grandma Eleanor had requested the public record and kept it. And then Elena told me something that broke my heart all over again. Your grandmother tried to get legal guardianship of you, Elena said quietly, watching my face. 3 separate times. She filed petitions in family court. Why didn't she tell me? I whispered, because Julian fought every single petition with pure rage. Elena explained. He didn't want you, but he didn't want her to have you either. It was about control. He threatened to drain his own accounts to bury her in endless legal fees if she didn't drop it. He wanted to keep you legally paralyzed. So Eleanor made a choice. She dropped the visible court fights, and she chose to build your financial fortress in complete secret instead. 3 weeks later, Boulder County Court, Room 4C. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and old dusty paper. The heavy oak benches creaked. The room was packed. Julian's wealthy friends, wearing expensive sweaters and grim expressions, filled the entire left side of the gallery. On the right side there were only 3 people. Simon, my therapist, Elena, and Martha Hayes. Julian sat at the petitioner's table in his crisp navy suit. He had a white handkerchief clutched in his trembling hand. His lawyer stood up and painted a tragic picture of Eleanor Sterling as an aged, isolated woman whose mind was failing, tricked by a greedy grandson. Julian dabbed his eyes perfectly on cue. Elena stood up. She didn't give a dramatic speech. She carried a heavy black iron chest to the judge's bench. The chest from Grandma's top shelf. Your Honor, Elena said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Inside this box are 9 handwritten journals detailing a 15-year chain of custody for this trust. Also included is a definitive independent neurological medical evaluation. She slid a crisp medical document toward the judge. Dated exactly 3 weeks before the trust was executed in 2010. Confirming Eleanor Sterling was in absolute, perfect cognitive health. Julian's lawyer swallowed hard. Julian stopped dabbing his eyes. Then Elena called Martha Hayes to the stand. Martha looked small in the witness box, but her voice was loud and clear. She looked directly at Julian's wealthy friends in the gallery. She described the freezing slush, the little boy dragging his frozen legs, the ripped blue recycling bag, the 911 call, and Julian's smooth lie to the deputy. I watched that boy walk down the street shivering to death, Martha said, glaring at Julian with pure disgust. There was nothing chosen about it. He was thrown away. The judge called for a 10-minute recess to review the medical files. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. As I walked out into the cold marble hallway to get a drink of water, Julian blocked my path. His friends were out of earshot. The frail victim mask instantly vanished. His eyes were cold, dark, and furious. He reached out and grabbed my forearm hard. His fingers dug into my suit jacket. You're ruining me, he hissed, his breath smelling like stale coffee and panic. Is that what you want? To destroy your own father? In my mind I was coding again. I was identifying the threat, neutralizing the error, and resetting the boundary. I looked down at his hand. I slowly reached over and removed his fingers from my arm, peeling them back one by one. No, Julian, I said, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth to finally have a home. I walked back into the courtroom. The judge returned to the bench. He looked down at the documents, then adjusted his glasses. He looked directly at Julian. The court has reviewed the medical records and the 15-year chain of custody, the judge said, his voice echoing in the silent room. The court finds the testament and trust of Eleanor R. Sterling to be valid, entirely sound, and legally binding. The petitioner, Rowan Vance, is formally recognized as the sole beneficiary. Julian's shoulders completely collapsed. His head dropped. The grand 22-year lie was finally over. The system had crashed, and he couldn't reboot it. But Elena wasn't finished. The judge started to lower his wooden gavel to dismiss the civil case. but Elena remained standing. The courtroom was dead silent. "Your Honor," Elena said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute chilling authority. "Before this court adjourns, I am formally entering evidence from a pending federal criminal matter into this civil record." Julian's head snapped up. His expensive lawyer frantically grabbed a pen, but it was too late. Elena pulled a thick stack of printed transcripts from her leather bag and handed them to the bailiff. "These are intercepted, encrypted communication logs, secured by the FBI under a federal warrant. They detail a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bodily harm against my client, Rowan Vance, orchestrated by his sister, Beatrice Vance." The country club men in the gallery stopped breathing. Elena didn't look at them. She looked dead at Julian. Included in these logs is a direct message from Julian Vance, authorizing the use of a violent felon to eliminate the primary beneficiary of this trust. She read the 8 words slowly, letting them hang in the dusty air. "Do what you must. Just keep me in the dark." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt physical. I watched the men on the left side of the aisle, Julian's wealthy, sympathetic friends, physically lean away from him. It was a microscopic shift, but in their world it was an earthquake. The mask was completely gone. The grieving, sick father had just been exposed as a monster. The judge flipped through the stark black and white pages. His face hardened into stone. He slowly took off his reading glasses and looked down at Julian. "Sir," the judge said, his voice dripping with disgust, "the contents of your communications have already been forwarded to the district attorney. I strongly advise you to consult criminal counsel immediately. We are adjourned." Julian sat perfectly still. He stared at the wood grain of the table as if a trapdoor had just opened beneath him. He was a system that had completely crashed. There was no rebooting his reputation. Outside the courthouse, the Colorado air was biting and cold. A local reporter with a notepad stepped into my path before I could reach the parking lot. "Mr. Vance, do you have a comment?" he asked, his pen ready. "What are you going to do with your grandmother's estate?" I looked past him, down the street toward where Pine Street sat quietly in the distance. My mind shifted from the sterile code of the courtroom back to the warmth of a cracked globe in an attic studio. "She built homes," I said quietly, my breath pluming in the cold air. "She built futures. Her home on Pine Street has been sitting empty for 6 years. I'm taking the trust, and I'm turning that house into a transition center for young men who age out of foster care. A place for kids who get handed a garbage bag instead of a suitcase. It will be called Sterling Forge." The reporter stopped writing. "Why Forge?" "Because my grandmother once told me to build my own fortress," I said. "Do you forgive your father?" the reporter pressed. I looked him in the eye. "Forgiveness is an internal process," I said smoothly. "But boundaries are a hard fact. I've set mine." The federal criminal trial came 4 months later. Faced with a mountain of intercepted digital evidence, Beatrice didn't even try to fight. She took a plea deal. 10 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 6. Miller, the heavy she hired, received 14 years. I sat in the back of the sterile federal courtroom during her sentencing. Beatrice stood in an oversized orange jumpsuit. Her designer clothes and curated smiles were gone. Her hair was flat. Before the marshals led her away, she turned around and found me in the gallery. I braced myself. A tiny foolish part of my brain thought she might finally cry. She might finally say she was sorry. She looked at me, her eyes completely blank. "I just needed the liquidity, Rowan," she said. "Not I'm sorry. Not I love you. I just needed the liquidity." She looked at my life like it was a line item on a spreadsheet, a variable in her way. I realized then she was completely hollow, just like Julian, a corrupted file. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt profoundly tired, and finally completely free of her. Julian was not charged criminally. The district attorney ruled that his text, "keep me in the dark," was too legally vague to prove intent for murder beyond a reasonable doubt. But the court of public opinion was merciless. His social record was annihilated. His country club permanently revoked his membership. His neighbors stopped speaking to him. The isolation he had forced on me for 22 years finally came for him. He quietly sold his large house and moved to a small anonymous condo in Phoenix. Alone. 7 months later, Sterling Forge officially opened. We had 18 volunteers. The old Victorian house smelled like fresh paint, lemon wax and polished oak floors. The heavy shadows were gone. We opened our doors to 4 teenagers the very first week. On a Tuesday evening, a 17-year-old boy named Theo was sitting at the kitchen table. He was tracing the wood grain with his thumb, looking at his battered backpack on the floor. "Did your dad throw you out too?" Theo asked quietly, not looking up. I walked over and sat across from him. Yes, I said. He did. Theo finally looked at me, his eyes guarded and full of defensive anger. So how did you survive? I survived with my own name, I told him, sliding a plate of warm food toward him. And I learned that building your own life is better than just surviving. 4 months after we opened, the cold weather returned to Colorado. I was standing on the front porch, watching the first snow of the year dust the lawn, when a car pulled up across the street. A frail man stepped out. It was Julian. He stood on the sidewalk, shivering in a thin coat, staring up at the brightly lit windows of the house. He looked like a ghost returning to a world he was no longer allowed to haunt. I walked down the steps and stopped at the edge of the property line. She gave it to you, Julian said. His voice was cracked, hollowed out by time and defeat. The whole legacy. She gave it to the architects of tomorrow. Julian, I said, keeping my distance. I grew up inside the warmth of this house, and I was discarded from yours. He rubbed his freezing hands together. Can I come in? He asked, his voice begging. Just once. Let me see it. I looked at him. I didn't see a father. I didn't see a threat. I just saw a sad, empty man standing in the slush. I thought about my wet homework bleeding into the gutter. I thought about the proxy document in Maui. I thought about the trapdoor. No, I said, my voice absolute and unwavering. The final firewall. This is their foundation, not yours. Julian stared at me for a long time. Then, he gave a small, tired bow of his head. He turned around, got back into his car, and drove away into the falling snow. He never looked back, and I never saw him again. Exactly 1 year after the court victory, Elena called me to her quiet office. She didn't have a file this time. She just slid one final envelope across her polished desk. It had no wax stamp, just my name, written in pencil. Dear little fox, if Elena gave you this letter, it means you stood your ground. I knew you would. Every single day you built a life on your own. You proved that family is not about blood. It is about the choice to stay. You chose to create instead of destroy. I am leaving you this foundation not because you are weak, but because you are steady. Do not let your fathers hollow into your home. Build your fortress. Fill it with people who choose you back. I chose you every single day. Minor Grandma Eleanor. That evening I sat on the creaky wooden porch of Sterling Forge. The house behind me was loud. It was full of life, full of arguments over video games, full of boys building their futures instead of freezing in the dark. I looked down Pine Street, watching the streetlights flicker on against the dusk. I pulled out my phone and looked at the faded digital scan of Eleanor and me. You were always enough. That's my story. It's not wrapped in a neat, perfect bow, but here is the data I finally processed. Here is what I learned. You do not owe your loyalty to people who mistake control for care. You absolutely do not owe your silence to shield people who would never ever shield you. Leaving a toxic system is not a sin. Setting a hard boundary is not a crime. And building a beautiful life that they did not design for you is not a betrayal. It is the blueprint. If no one has knocked on your door to tell you that yet, consider this my knock. Build your fortress. There is a profound grounding truth in bringing our darkest chapters into the light. Stories like this one, raw, unfiltered, and forged in the fire of absolute betrayal, carry a heavy intensity, but they also offer a map out of the cold. If you felt the weight of this journey, if this blueprint for survival resonated with you, please consider leaving a like to let me know this connected with you. We heal by realizing we aren't alone in the wreckage. If you have your own story of surviving the unimaginable and building something beautiful from the ashes, the comments are your space to share it. I read every single one. Subscribe and stay with us for more powerful stories that remind us of the strength we have left. I'll see you in the next one.